What's going on, everyone? Welcome back to the 415ers podcast, coming at you 3 times a week, as always, on the Odyssey Sports Podcast Network with 95.7 The Game. Evan Giddings and Marc Grandy, of course, encouraging you, as always, to download, rate, and subscribe. 5 stars are much appreciated. Marc, how are you doing? Middle of the week as the Niners get set for their trip to Mexico to take on the Arizona Cardinals.
Yeah, I'm doing well. We here on the 415ers, of course, in San Francisco. The Niners, though, already in Colorado. They're not playing the Broncos again. They are just getting ready for the Mexico City elevation. So they're practicing this week in Colorado, getting ready for that elevation. But yeah, I'm excited for another episode of the 415ers. Excited for another primetime 49er game on Monday night. This time should be a lot of fun.
Yeah, I think it's like in Colorado Springs, right? They're practicing around the Air Force area, I
Yeah, I
believe.
think so. Yeah.
Yeah, well, of course, John Lynch, who played a lot of his career in Denver, might be happy to go out there with the team. Kyle Shanahan, I'm sure, spent a lot of time in Denver under his dad, Mike, who was the head coach for the Broncos. Excited to be there as well. And we are excited to be coming at you, as always, on the 415ers. So where we want to start today, Marc, is kind of where we picked up at the tail end of Monday's reaction episode to the 22-16 win over the Chargers. 49ers are now 5-4. They're above 500. They have back-to-back wins for the first time. But one thing that sort of stood out that I felt was the most critique-worthy part of the game was the lack or inability to cash in the red zone. And as you kind of pointed out on the episode, and as we've been talking about it in between pods, like it wasn't just the fact that the Niners got into the 20s, but it's the fact that they were down to the 10 to the 5-yard line. They were basically knocking on the door on 5 different trips to the red zone within the 10-yard line, and they came away with only 2 touchdowns and 3 field goals. And something that Kyle Shanahan, I don't consider him necessarily a combative press conference person, but he is certainly like inquisitive. If you ask him a question, he'll sometimes kind of take a second, maybe ask a follow-up, try and figure out why you're asking this, because someone asked him, I believe it was Eric Branch of the San Francisco Chronicle, asked him, why they weren't clicking in the red zone, basically. And Kyle Shanahan's response was, well, if we had scored 3 touchdowns instead of kicking 3 field goals, we would have over 30 points and we would have been clicking. But the fact remains, they only had 22 on the board. They settled for 3 field goals. Did you feel like, even just watching the game, that the red zone offense was sort of struggling for San Francisco?
Yeah, I don't know how you could say it didn't. I mean, you got into the red zone 5 times and you scored 2 touchdowns, and those field goals that you settled for were, really close to the end zone, as you mentioned. Like, not all red zone appearances are created equal. Like, you get to the 19-yard line, the drive stalls there. That's different than when you get down to the 2. Like, those are not the same thing. And I think when you consider all of the success that the 49ers had offensively, I mean, we talked about it a lot last episode, just from a box score perspective, final score aside, it was a dominant 49ers win. I mean, the number of yards that they gained, all the first downs they got, the time of possession. I mean, everything except for the score pointed towards a blowout win and a lot of points scored for the 49ers. So I think it's not only the number of drives, it's not only where those drives stalled, again, generally inside the 10, even inside the 5. It's also just the ease with which they moved the ball for most of that game up until that point, up until they got in goal to go situations. I think it's certainly more than fair to say that that red zone offense was not working very well. And maybe the red zone offense isn't even specific enough. Maybe it's specifically the goal to go offense once you get within 10 yards. And generally that's where it gets more difficult. I mean, you have less space to work with. It's a shorter, more compact field at that moment. You can't stretch the defense out as much. But still, you should be scoring more than 2 of 5 trips into the red zone. So you mentioned Eric Branch asking the question. I think certainly a very fair question. And yeah, the offense did well overall, had a really good game when don't consider those red zone mishaps. And I think, that overall success of the offense probably makes you wonder or maybe notice the red zone struggles more, because it was really the one area that the offense just did not quite do that well.
Well, especially with, I think both of the drives that were really on the door that drew the most critique from fans, from media members, was the final, or front of me, the first drive of the game, and then the final drive of the game,
Yeah.
when they end up picking up, like, 4 first downs on the first drive. They go 14 plays, 67 yards. They take up 7.5 minutes right out of the gate. Quintessential 49ers drive. They run the ball, they convert on third downs, they shove the ball right down the Chargers' throat after giving up a touchdown on defense. And then instead of going up to tie the game, I don't think I necessarily disagree with the decision to take the points that early, but I think what people had issue with was the third down call, which was just kind of a shotgun give to McCaffrey without any sort of juice in the backfield. When the Chargers, even though they hadn't lost the defensive lineman, they did throughout the game. They're pretty weak up front. And it just seemed like that was a chance for San Francisco early on in the game to establish, like, we're here, we're going to run the ball. And they certainly did throughout the game. 40 rushes, Kyle Shanahan 8-0 now in his time with San Francisco when they do that. So it obviously works. It turns into results. But there was just so many chances for them to extend and separate themselves from a Chargers team that was like asking, just almost begging to be put away. And I mean, in the second half, you get the ball at the 6-yard line after a downs by the Chargers with 1:17 left. You basically run 3 plays. You don't get too much further at all. You get down from the 8 to the 2-yard line. And of course, that's where Kyle Shanahan opts to not go forward on fourth down. It's as much as like the ineffectiveness within that 10-5-yard range, as well as also I'm just not sure where I see Kyle Shanahan on the aggression scale, because like he had a chance to go for it on both fourth downs, and to me made maybe one correct decision, but the other, it just doesn't really make any sense. Like how, like, the identity of this team is defense first and running, and there's an incongruity right now to me between the play calling and what the team's strengths are. Like, I would hope that if Kyle Shanahan's in another position like that at the end of the game, I know he said they moved back from the 1 to the 2, otherwise they would have gone forward on fourth down. But like, to me, that's an opportunity for you to basically put the game away, something you haven't done because you can't cash in the red zone to that point. Like, there's absolutely an issue there that the 49ers need to address, because there's going to be some teams, unlike the Chargers, that are not banged up, that if you let them hang around are going to make you pay for settling for field goals. And one of those teams might even be this upcoming Monday night against Kyler Murray and the Cardinals team that has had your number in recent regular seasons.
Well, I want to play out your scenario there for a moment. So, end of the game, after that Chargers turnover on downs, you're up by 3. About a minute left. Chargers are using all their timeouts, so they'll have no timeouts left with the ball, whether they get it after a field goal, whether they get it after a touchdown, whether they get it after a turnover on downs if you go forward or not. So let's play out one, okay, how it actually happened. The field goal is up and good. Niners up by 6. Chargers ball from the 25-yard line. They need a touchdown now. So they need to go 75 yards, assuming a touchback back to the 25-yard line. They need to go 75 yards to win the game, or at the very least force overtime. If you go for it on fourth down, and let's just assume you don't get it, because that's the risk you run. You're still up by 3 points. Chargers have the ball at the 2-yard line. They need to get only in field goal range now. So what? You need to say they need to get to the 35-yard line to have a 52-yard field goal attempt. They need to move the ball about 63 yards down the field. So if you're looking just at total yards,
remember also Dicker earlier in the game barely put a 47-yard field goal through the post. Like that's your backup. That's the backup kicker on the other side.
And I'm not saying one's better than the other. And, there's certainly a challenge in moving the ball from the 2 that isn't there for moving the ball from the 25. That's certainly part of it as well. But my only point is I think that the risk reward, whichever way you play it out, is relatively similar. And I could make the case that, me kicking the field goal, making it a 6-point lead, is also trusting my defense, because I trust my defense to keep them out of the end zone. I mean, I think that could be part of it as well. I agree with you. I think the first one, in the first quarter, their first possession is certainly more clearly, the right decision to take the points at that point of the game. I think the one at the end of the game that we're talking about here is a little more a gray area for me personally. But I also agree with you something you said earlier, kind of about the aggression, maybe not necessarily on fourth down, but earlier in drives. I mean, you mentioned the 3rd and goal from the 2, and it was simply a shotgun snap and a handoff to Christian McCaffrey. Before that, interestingly enough, it was 2nd and goal from the 9 out of the shotgun. Deebo Samuel was lined up on the left hip of, of Garoppolo. McCaffrey on the right hip, and they moved McCaffrey in motion from the right behind Jimmy Garoppolo around to the left to bring a defender with him. They then hand it off to Deebo, and he has a nice 7-yard gain up to the 2, setting up that 3rd and goal from the 2-yard line, where they then ran a very similar play. It was McCaffrey in the backfield in a shotgun for Garoppolo. Deebo Samuel was lined up in the slot to the right. He comes in motion right to left, bringing a defender with him, and they hand it off to Christian McCaffrey, who again gets nothing, and they ultimately kick the field goal. So maybe the issue, at least in my opinion, might not be the decision or the decision to go for it or not on 4th down, but it's maybe that you essentially ran the same play on 2nd and 3rd down, 3rd and goal. Just you handed it off to McCaffrey instead of Deebo. I mean, it was really the same exact play with the formation. The 2 guys involved in the play, McCaffrey and Deebo, one got 1 carry, one got the other. I think the issue maybe is more so how you're calling those plays leading up to a potential 4th down decision rather than the actual 4th down decision itself.
Whether it's the decision, whether it's the play calling, I don't think it's unfair to say that the 49ers are not clicking in the red zone. And it wasn't just against the Chargers. They've been in the red zone 31 times this year. They have converted 17 of those opportunities into touchdowns. That's about 55%. That it's pretty middle of the pack in the NFL, technically on the bottom half of that side of the league. And I don't think it's a coincidence that they're also 18th in total points scored. And that's a Chargers team that, even though they are advertised as explosive due to their quarterback, they also are pretty middle of the pack when it comes to points scored this year because of their lack of weapons right now. So that's a team where you're not necessarily expecting them to maybe score 24 against you or whatever their average is. They scored below that. But if there's a team that you're facing in the future that can put up points and that can cash in red zone and red zone trips, you are going to have to do that as well. And so I don't really understand Kyle Shanahan refuting the fact that his red zone offense was not clicking, because to me it was very clear that it was. I understand there's 5 trips to the red zone, but if you get on the doorstep of your opponent and you have a chance to put them away early, I know they fell behind technically, 7-0 out of the gate, but they get their first crack on offense and they get a chance to score. That's a chance you should convert into a touchdown, because there are going to be teams that you play in the future, maybe during the regular season, maybe in the playoffs, but at some point down the line that are going to make you pay for turning 2-yard line opportunities in the red zone into field goals.
Yeah, and I agree with you. I mean, it's something that this team absolutely needs to be better at. They were, their numbers throughout the years have kind of fluctuated. They haven't, they've more often than not been a middle of the pack red zone offense than a good one. Interestingly enough, kind of just looking at the numbers and doing some number crunching, you mentioned they're about 55% converting red zone opportunities into touchdowns, which again is right around middle of the pack, a little towards the bottom half. At home, interestingly enough, they have an absolutely disgusting 37.5% conversion rate from red zone into touchdowns at home. Sub 40%. On the road, they're up over 73%. So just an absolutely wild number there. I have no clue what that means. I think it's probably more just a relatively small sample size, and they've had.
So you're saying they're choke artists at home?
Somehow, I mean, the
they don't like to score for the Levi faithful.
The fans are being too loud down there in one of the corners of the end zone. They're not letting their offense think and think in silence. I don't know what's going on.
They got to go to a silent count. I think that's what we've discovered at this point at home.
It's just like the Rams down in SoFi, huh?
Exactly. Yeah, especially with all those powder blue Chargers jerseys, every one per section. That was just deafening at Levi's Stadium.
Yeah, so I don't know what what to make of that. I think just in general, they need to be better home or away. Clearly, I mean the numbers suggest that they're pretty good on the road right now. Interestingly enough, I mean if you extrapolated that 73% conversion rate that Niners have on the road, if you just looked at that as maybe their entire season's worth of turning red zone appearances into touchdowns, that would rank them third best in the NFL, behind only Tennessee and Kansas City. So. Uh, they're certainly capable of it. It's just they've had games, specifically at home for some reason, like this one on Sunday, where they just they can't quite punch it in. Shanahan probably is a little more conservative than other teams would be in those, fourth and goal scenarios. Part of that is because he doesn't have a star quarterback like a Patrick Mahomes, like a Josh Allen, like even a Jalen Hurts. But still, I think they can be better leading up to that fourth down to avoid a fourth down entirely and get it into the end zone earlier.